Sonic 1 for the Game Gear and Master System came out in 1991, a handful of months after the Genesis version. The Game Gear version is the one that got ported to almost everything later on, so probably the one most are familiar with. But don't worry, my South American and European friends, I got you covered on the Master System too. It starts off showing a map of South Island that updates between each act to show your progress. It's a great way to set the scene, a nice plus over its Genesis counterpart. Unsurprisingly, it starts with the familiar Green Hill. Half the stages in this game are inspired by the ones from the 16-bit version, while the other half are original. Both start off mimicking the beginning of the Genesis stage with the Moto Bug Badnik and raised platform with a ring box. Beyond this, however, the game completely diverts from the 16-bit edition in level design. You'll quickly discover the game is linear and closer to your usual 8-bit platformer, yet keeping almost all the gimmicks, bumpers, springs, and such. Notably absent from these 8-bit versions is the iconic loops and other momentum-based features such as tunnels. In fact, speed can only be gained on dedicated ramps if you roll. That sense of speed is only a bit faster than your typical platformer maybe, apart from the obvious hardware limitations. A big reason for this perception difference is due to the fact Sonic can't outrun the screen and stays firmly towards the middle, more so on the Game Gear, which is, as I'm sure you've noticed, is to compensate due to the screen crunch in the Game Gear version. This will become a much larger issue in the Game Gear edition of Sonic 2, but in this one I thought it was adapted well. There is adjustments in the stages to remove a lot of blind jumps and give some margin of error. Like for example, in Green Hill they added these yellow hazard signs to one of the spike pits. Similar hazard signs would oddly start being used way later in games like Unleashed, Colors, and Generations. You'll see quite a few more differences as we run through the game, with some levels being entirely reworked from each other. The team did a wonderful job converting the 3D look of the palm trees into the 8-bit realm. It's all a bit simplified, particularly the grass. Yet it's got the trees and flowers on full display. The flowers even animate on the Game Gear version, just like the Genesis. The Master System ones are oddly static. The pink ones just move up and down on a slow loop. But that version does have more totem poles. Keep in mind the Game Gear spec-wise is essentially a portable Master System, even being able to run that system's cartridges through an adapter. Something to note, this first act features what I believe is the only instance of the power sneakers in the entire game. It doesn't work with this game's more precise level design, so I can see why they didn't include it. Probably programmed them in and just wanted to show it off somewhere after the effort. This whole act can actually be skipped using a ramp. I didn't even mean to, but it just happened. The only time I think you can get Sonic off the screen like this. I had to go back and replay it after just to get the footage for most of the stage. Act 2 is more interesting with its change-up by throwing you right down into an underground cave system. Apart from being unique, it's a nice introduction to how Sonic moves in the pools of water that fall from the high-up waterfalls. The second act was likely the inspiration for the renditions of Green Hill we later see in Generations and Mania. The only difference between the handheld and console version in this act is a checkpoint being on a lower section on the Master System. The small differences just fascinate me, and yeah, the checkpoints now are these arrow monitors rather than the posts. If you try to rush your way out of this underground section, you'll miss out on the first hidden Chaos Emerald. This time, they are right in the zones themselves, hidden away, and special stages only serve as a way to get extra lives and continues. A great improvement in this rabbit's opinion. Much rather would try some alternate pathways on replays, than desperately holding on to rings just for a small chance at an emerald. Oh yeah, and you can't pick up your rings when you get hit, by the way. Definitely ups the difficulty. Act 3 in this game serves as a dedicated boss encounter with very little level before it. This first boss is laughably easy. Robotnik hovers above and will come down to charge you in the Egg Mobile. No lasers, no wrecking ball, no weapons at all. In the Game Gear version, thanks to the screen crunch, you can hit him from the very beginning and not even let him charge once. By now, I'm sure you've noticed how different the general design is from its 16-bit counterpart. This actually was not developed by Sonic Team, but by Ancient, a company started by Yuzo Koshiro, a music composer after talks with Sega about developing an 18-bit adaptation of Sonic, who formed the business with his family due to Sega not being able to form a contract with individuals. Before this, there's some notable games he did composition for. The first couple Ys games, ActRaiser, Dragon Slayer 4, and the opening theme of a spin-off called Romantica. He found his way to Sega working on Revenge of Shinobi, GG Shinobi, and Streets of Rage. After forming Ancient with his sister Ayano, took on the director role, and doing some design while his mom Tomo handled some behind-the-scenes work. Yuzu himself stayed composing music while hiring a small team for the rest. In an interview with Polygon, Yuzu reflected on being hired by Sega for the project. so let's just allow him to put the situation in his own words.
I mean, thinking back on it, it is quite weird. Sonic is a huge property, and I'm not totally sure why they asked us to do it. I imagine at the time, the internal teams at Sega were very, very busy. They still had to create Game Gear and Master System versions, even though they had nobody in-house to work on them. At the time, there wouldn't have been very many external development companies to work with, and searching for one of those would have been very difficult. Probably one of the biggest reasons would be that section chief I mentioned I knew at Sega. He put a lot of faith in me, for one reason or another.
And that faith would be well placed. Bridge Zone continues with a very similar theme to Green Hill and builds on it in a more gentle way than the 16-bits Marble Zone. Now that I say that, it would be better to phrase that as it directly builds on Green Hill. The reused sprites would be the obvious part, but in terms of level design, it has multiple layers you're forced to work with to move forward, suggesting it's worth looking up and down. The titular bridges can have blocks fall out from right under Sonic after he touches them, and others bow in the middle, making it difficult to stand on. Throw in the seesaw, moving platforms and the spike badniks that can only be taken out by rolling, and it's easy to see this is the devs having the player get comfortable with taking more risks. The beginning of Act 1 is a pretty clear example of their awareness of the screen crunch. The Master System version right away has the player jump upwards twice, and then presents 3 platforms evenly going downwards, whereas the Game Gear is almost completely flat, with the platforms at even heights only heading downwards at the last one. In fact, the island you land on was changed into a slope heading upwards. The console versions had you jump downwards and added in a troll bumper to avoid that can send you to your death in the river. On the Game Gear, the player would be far less likely to notice this bumper had they included it. The Chaos Emerald in this stage is pretty tricky too. You have to wait for a bridge block to drop while you're on it, and just before you die, jump to get it. If you jump too high, you can try again a few more times. The most memorable aspect of Bridge Zone is its second act, where it becomes an auto-scroller of all things, making it the first of these in the entire series. Later on, they become synonymous, riding with Tails on the Tornado. The Game Gear version of this act features far less bottomless pits, with a few that remain being set very low so the player can clearly see the water rushing below. Trying to outrun the screen is useless here, as you're more likely to just crash into a badnik, or even worse, become trapped on the screen with a collapsing bridge, and nothing left to stand on. When it's an auto-scroller, nothing you can do but wait it out, like a day in school. The boss of Bridge Zone introduces a concept that I assume went on to inspire multiple bosses in Sonic 2, namely hilltops and oil oceans. Robotnik in a submarine immerses himself in water while firing projectiles at the player. In between him popping up and firing the shot, Sonic can quickly land a hit. In fact, we'll see this concept remixed in a couple zones in this very game. The handheld version of the boss is quite a bit different. It features a long collapsing bridge in the run-up to it. Now is a good time to mention, these collapsing bridges cause a massive slowdown on both editions of the game. Anyway, the boss here takes place on 2 sloped bridges attached to each other. I guess it didn't feel they had the pixel real estate to give proper platforms in between some water. This version of the boss ends up easier since you can just roll into the center of the slope to avoid the shots. Also, this is where I discovered multiple things. First, that there is no invincibility frames after taking damage with a shield, and you can't keep bouncing on Robotnik to keep damaging him. He has iframes, but Sonic doesn't. There is no rings during boss stages in this game either, but you can carry a shield between acts. Though it's useless in situations like this, 8-bit games are really less forgiving. The next stage brings us to Jungle Zone, the first with such a theme in the series. This might be my favorite act in the game. Jungles just get me, and this one probably best shows off the Game Gear's slightly wider color palette, with the brush in the background having extra depth with shading, even including some fruit that's not present in the Master System. And the music is really cute. However, I'm not sure it reminds me of a jungle. It makes me think more of like a harbor, you know, an ocean theme. This act has a very underutilized gimmick with being able to run on logs across the water. You only go across a couple short ponds on the main route. Another is used to get across to a Chaos Emerald at least. That's well hidden below a waterfall. It's not used at all in the second act, but I'd like to see this used to move on some slopes on longer sections and needing to jump to other logs to keep moving. Would have mixed it up more. Speaking of Act 2, it's the more notable one here. It's a vertical stage where you need to work your way up a large waterfall. A rarity in a series usually about speed. This act has some platforms that will crumble when touched, Yet, like I said, oddly does not feature any of the logs that move down the waterfall like in the previous act. Would have been a great chance to build on what was taught before. This act once again shows a difference in design for the handheld. The platforms are much wider, with more long ones to run on instead of constant jumping. To add even more leeway for the player, you're able to scroll the screen back down, giving ample chance to be saved by other platforms before dying. In fact, when it gets up just a bit, it's impossible to die from falling. On console, the screen follows your climb closely and won't scroll back down, so even a minor mistake will end up losing a life. If you're playing this, be careful to not scroll too fast or you'll miss on the extra power-ups, which are often just off screen to the sides. It's a solid act and mixes things up well. Maybe Sega should have funded Nitrome's vertical Sonic platformer they pitched after all. The boss of this act is pretty okay. Like the Genesis edition, I wouldn't say any boss in this game is particularly great, but they do tend to offer more challenge. This one has Robotnik drop some bombs that roll on a sloped vine platform. In the Game Gear version, he can be hit even when flying above. On the Master System version, you can just manage to reach him by jumping off the ends. The easier choice is to just wait for him to come down to drop some balls and hit him a couple times. Also, I swear the hitboxes on these bombs are larger on the console version. I haven't mentioned this yet, but the animals that come from the capsule are huge. They look ripped straight from the 16-bit game. Next up is a familiar stage, Labyrinth Zone. The stage that gave many nightmares was adapted for half the bits. And man, I'm impressed with the visuals. It looks damn close to the console version. The weird owl blocks, the crystals, even the color changes when going into the water here. The sprites are all adjusted to be much larger on the Game Gear. Not to mention the liquid here is a much more of a green color to signify that the water is actually polluted. On the Genesis it was so close to blue it was difficult to get that point across. Like if you mention it, yeah, it was slightly tinted green, but it seems more like purely an artistic choice in the wider color palette. And this stage takes so many of the design features from the original. Floating platforms that try to slam you into the spikes, but here are made larger, features of the zone required to progress. There's many more tight jumps in this version too. The worst ones featuring the Unidasu sitting right under a huge ceiling of spikes. What am I even supposed to do in this situation? Nothing, but run back and wait till the spikes are fired, all while the timer is still ticking down to drowning. Of course those dreaded bubbles are also still here, and they are spaced pretty far apart, stretching you right to your limit on the countdown. Now iconic drowning theme isn't in this one. The music doesn't change at all. Just a digital beat plays over the standard zone theme, which itself isn't actually a cover of the original. It's a lot more upbeat and fits the underwater theme better with its touch of thumping bass, much as 8-bit music can thump anyway. Not as great as the Genesis version, which I expressed my deep fondness for in the video on that one, but it's pretty cool. In fact, on the handheld, the acts are made a good bit shorter with less side pass, the biggest difference being the location of the Chaos Emerald in Act 2. The console edition has a somewhat infamous placement with it being directly in a bed of spikes. There's an invincibility power-up you can grab a good distance back. You're expected to know all of this, and then run to the Emerald. Keep in mind movement in water is far more slow. That's not even considering it seems like the game itself has slowdown with projectiles or enemies on screen in the zone. You can just barely make it there in time if you don't stop. If you do run out, you can jump in and use your iframes to hopefully get out in time, or just take the death since you do keep emeralds between lives. This boss is basically a repeat of the one seen in Bridge Zone. He just comes down from the top now as well. You also get infinite air in this fight, so it's really not even worth discussing. What is worth talking about is this damn troll one-up just before it. It's in both versions. You jump past these spikes to get it, only check out when you drop down here. When you're coming back, it's impossible to get by without dying. You go in and grab this extra life, and then they trap you, forcing you to lose it right away. The Master System version traps you using a slightly raised platform upon entering with spikes above. What's with water levels bringing out the absolute worst in stage designers? All in all, this level plays a lot closer to what people think the 16-bit Labyrinth Zone is like. Scrap Brain keeps a shocking amount of the elements from the original, like conveyor belts, electric shockers, flames. All that's really missing is the gears you can roll around to gain momentum. It makes sense that one is missing. After all, if you can't do loops, how would the physics for that work? The most interesting element that did cross over is the tunnels, which here have become teleporters. Act 1 is almost a straight line that can be cleared in less than a minute. Nothing of note, except it is where I found out you're capped at 9 lives in these versions. No double digits here. Act 2 has a very odd design. It essentially functions as a maze. Early on, the act divides into 2 paths, both of which load into completely new screens, and is the only use of that feature in the entire game. There is an issue with suddenly introducing this out of the blue, however. I ended up taking the top route first, which leads to 2 doors and a button. Hitting the button closes one doorway and opens the other. I just ended up for minutes trying to hit the button and outrun the first door before it closes. This didn't work, so I ended up turning around. I've only played this game to completion once in my life before this, I think. Probably in Mega Collection Plus. Beating the game like this on the handheld itself would be a tall order, with no saves as a kid. And a complete lack of battery life in the Game Gear didn't help. Alright, maybe I'm exaggerating with the battery life. At least if they were fresh. If they weren't, well then... Huh? Hey Mom, I need some more batteries. I just gave you some. Yeah, but it's out. Well, I'm not giving you more. Find something else to do. You'll put us in the poorhouse. As an aside, another emerald is on this upper path, with you being required to take a leap of faith into the third pit past the entrance to find a teleporter to this emerald. You cannot see it though through the door if you skip this, so there isn't much of a hint on what to do. How is anybody supposed to figure this out other by accident or happening to buy the right magazine article? Back to business on that lower path. The intended route, I believe, is to take this path, which keeps going lower and lower, while being lined with ball hogs, whose bombs do not go nearly as far as in the 16-bit edition if you're wondering. I mean, I wondered. Way down this long path there is multiple teleporters. The ones you'd run into naturally just return you to the start. You'd have to know to jump into this side path higher up, which then finally brings you back up top, where you would see the button and understand what to do. If you didn't, you're running through all this over again. Seriously, who came up with this? What were they thinking? They decided to turn this into some maze game for this act. You just can't throw this kind of curve at players with nothing giving them the expectations for such challenges. This isn't how any problem was solved before. Everything before this was a test of speed or platforming. After that long slog, you finally get to the exit, where I found out the end panel can in fact show something besides Robotnik or the bonus stage exclamation point. Sonic gives you an extra life. This is the only time I got anything else for either playthrough. Act 3 does not feature a boss and is just a very short maze, not even worth discussing. It's so forgettable I completely forgot about it until editing, and am recording this during it. It's not confusing like at the end you get on a levitating platform and follow Robotnik up to the final zone. Sky-Base Zone Act 1 is a literally nauseating stage. And I do mean literally, as in literally, not hyperbolically. If you're sensitive to flashing lights, just skip this part to the timestamp on the screen. Like it actually gave me a very slight headache and I'm not sensitive. If you're gonna skip and want the short version, this act sucks. Let's just keep this one brief so as to not torture us all. Okay, let's go. This stage's big gimmick is the diamonds that send lightning bolts between each other, which causes that huge yellow multi-flash in the Game Gear version. You'll keep seeing it over and over again. There isn't much time between them. It can be a pretty difficult stage with areas that trick you into thinking it's safe to stand on, only to get knocked back, often right off the stage to your death. This has turned into quite the struggle with the constant flashes on top of it. On the Master System version, the flash is more subtle and not painful. It's a brighter shade of blue instead of the primary yellow. The stage is a different design here. Seems to be more forgiving. Less drops into the abyss and sneaky setups with the electric fields. One tip I will give is towards the end, there's a bomb badnik that's just before a platform with a propeller to ride on. Approach the bomb and let them explode, otherwise it will do it while you're on the platform and knock you right off. Shortly after that is thankfully the end. The difficulty spike in this stage combined with a constant flashing background just makes this easily the worst act in the entire game. Alright, let's switch to some other footage now for this talk so everyone can rejoin us. I will acknowledge the much more harsh flash on the Game Gear is likely due to adapting the game to a smaller screen. It's not going to make you sick a couple feet from your face in a small box. But these modern ports are played on a big screen, and it's just brutal, particularly with how bright modern ones are. Remember, the Game Gear version is what's always been ported. The only exception is the Master System edition was on the Wii's now defunct Virtual Console, in some plug-and-play console by Tectoy. So I wondered, did they change these flashes going forward? It was not modified in Adventure DX or Mega Collection Plus. They were finally toned down in Origins Plus, so thank you for that, devs. Act 2 is the same on both versions, with this featuring the most well-hidden emerald to find. You actually need to run forward just a bit at the beginning and then turn around right away. Straight down off the back of the starting platform, out of sight, is now a floating one you need to jump on, which will ride you up to a few others and eventually to the front of the ship where it sits. This also functions as an easier pathway because just past the emerald is a few cannons to the end goal. The other path is a climb up the side of the ship through a slog of cannons and propellers, and the fact there is no rings here. Something about these early handheld games and not liking rings. It will become sadistic in some future entries. In fact, they just completely removed the ring counter from this final act. Once you get inside, the games again diverge into two different bosses, both having the goal of hitting Robotnik encased in his glass tube. The handheld one being the easier and more straightforward fight, for the fact that the fire bursts from the ground do follow a solid pattern, coming from the left, right, and then middle sections. The far left works for a small space to hide out, clearly taking inspiration from its 16-bit counterpart, including the homing electrical spark that appears when Robotnik jumps on a button. The fire interruptions work very effectively as a stand-in for Robotnik's giant pistons, in this case turning into more of a test of reflexes rather than patience. From a gameplay standpoint, I'd go as far as to say it's the more effective final boss, testing the skills of a platformer and Sonic speed. But visually it's of course not as dramatic. The giant pistons crashing down really gives a feeling of doom and stress. The Master System's final boss takes a very different direction, with a moving electric wall that turns on and off. For the first 4 hits, it will be disabled till stopping right in front of Robotnik and then turn on and force Sonic to the far left side. Looking at my footage after playing, I now realize there is a single tile you can stand on just before the upward slope. As you can see, I was running up at the very top. Honestly, this probably is still the optimal place, and the electric ball can't target you properly, while on the ground it can. After those 4 hits, the electric wall starts turning off and on more irregularly. At least there isn't any apparent pattern. Your best bet is to just wait for it to turn off, get through fast, and hope for the best. At times it can even appear to wait for you to jump through. It's very odd and I don't get the logic. It's one of those gameplay features that can be difficult to describe. I just find this final boss a bit annoying and it doesn't feel overall intimidating. Any of the last 3 bosses would feel more climactic than this. More like a stage hazard than a boss. True about even the Game Gear 16-bit version to some degree, here you just really feel it as a cheap gimmick. When Sonic shatters the glass and gives chase, Robotnik appears to escape. Still amazing how fast this big dude runs. Sonic follows him through a teleporter, and you might think you're heading to the second phase of a boss. But no, it's the ending cutscene. In both, Sonic gets to drop on him in Green Hill, and if you got all 6 emeralds, Sonic releases them in a similar gesture to the Genesis version. But this time it returns to the overview of South Island and removes the pollution. This actually is a more direct reference to the message of, at least in the early Sonic series, nature versus technology, environmentalism. It's obvious once someone says it, yeah, but you don't play the game with it in your face like, say, Awesome Possum, an evil scientist named Robotnik, emphasis on the robot part, trying to take over an island of animals and turning them into robots, i.e. technology. The stages tend to get slowly more taken over by said technology, even working your way through polluted water. Until the series went 3D, you don't even see humans besides Robotnik, even though Sonic has always taken place on Earth in the Japanese canon. So it's even started out being very much nature versus technology. Anyway, the point is, while it's not full anarcho-primitivist, it's most certainly a green-pilled series with an environmentalist message just below the surface. Also, as the credits play, Sonic sings into a microphone. This is actually due to the fact early in the development of his character design he was planned to be part of a rock band. Seems it was dropped pretty quick though. Kinda cool to see this remnant of it. With the game complete, I'd say it's time to check out some reviews. Starting off with December 1991's GamePro being the only outlet in the USA to review the Master System version. Reviews should be put in quotes here, as this is more a description of the game rather than an actual critique. Also, what are they doing using the box art for the Genesis version? The rating gave it a full soy face for graphics and challenge, and half a soy face for the rest. In America, this game actually has the distinction of being the final official game ever put out for the Master System, and it didn't release in Japan at all on the console, showing how the platform sadly never caught on in either country. Continuing with the same magazine, another review for the Game Gear appeared in their February 1992 issue. Again, it's more of a description, but this one at least gives a bit more of an opinion in the last section. stating, "It's amazing how Sega's programming wizards effectively crammed the same super fast gameplay and action of its Genesis big brother within the tiny Game Gear. They praise the audio graphics and call it a joy to behold," finishing with a rating of 4.5 soy faces out of 5. The same rating given to the Genesis edition last episode, which also puts this above the Master System version. I'm rather inclined to disagree with that, but it's a different person reviewing these, I guess. Electronic Gaming Monthly the same month also reviewed the game. In the header they lie by saying it includes all the original levels from the Genesis. The ratings are all fantastic, with 3 9s and an 8. They also gave it an Editor's Choice Gold Award, singing such praises as, "Sonic fans may find it a refreshing change of pace and a welcome semi-sequel to the Genesis original. If you thought Sonic moved fast on the Genesis, wait till you see him on the Game Gear." What? This is such a strange comment we'll see a few times throughout these magazines. The gameplay clearly is faster on the Genesis. Like, it's really not even close. Anyway, they compare it to another game, stating it would appear this will go the same route as Castle Evolution, adding new levels and challenges to the original 16-bit Smash. Castle Evolution referring to a Mickey Mouse game that also was originally on the Genesis and got an addition for the Master System and Game Gear. A great comparison. They finish with, "I can't wait to see an 8-bit Toe Jam and Earl. Unfortunately, that wish would never come to fruition." December 1991, Sega Pro over in the UK didn't even have the game as the cover lead. Instead, that was given to the Mega Drive's James Pond 2. Whether it's the fact you can't beat double the bits or James Pond was that big, I'm not sure. Over on page 58, the review for the Master System starts with a very bizarre lead-in about how Robotnik is actually the good guy because if animals are roboticized, people won't have to worry about stepping in their excrement. It even goes so far as to imply that this is the real backstory. Weird. The writer then goes on to say he prefers the lack of parallax scrolling in this version because it gives the subtle feeling of actually being in another world. The mountains scroll smoothly, and don't detract from the action in the foreground. Very interesting opinion there. He does mention the map before each stage is reminiscent of Mario on the NES. That's a connection I hadn't made that was the likely inspiration for the edition. And this dude really loves this game. Going on to say the Master System version is as close as you are going to get to the perfect game. The levels are larger, the bonus stage is innovative, and the game is constantly challenging and enjoyable. It's still mind-numbingly fast, in that the gameplay is unrivaled. Wow, now that's true love. As stated earlier, I can agree with the bonus stage in the Master System game is far better than the Mega Drive, but not with the Master System version of Sonic is actually better than the Mega Drive version. But hey, more power to him. And it's certainly a solid 8-bit game. Unsurprisingly, the writer gives it near perfect scores in everything, with an overall score of 96, with the only complaint being, it's still a bit too easy. In the same month came Mean Machines, also in the UK, and it has an absolutely terrifying cover. What the hell, man? And it has a rather confused review for the Master System saying stuff like, "The speed of the game is another blinding aspect that almost puts the Mega Drive version to shame." There it is again, a massive exaggeration if I ever read one. What isn't, however, is their statement that it has the smoothest scrolling on the machine, and excellent renditions of the 16-bit graphics, and a stunning main sprite. Before we hit up the scores, something of interest is the artwork on the pages. On the first we got the American Mohawk Sonic from the 16-bit edition, yet we got multiple pieces of Japanese art with Sonic launching off the seesaws and starlight in a dramatic pose with Robotnik. Right here on these pages it clearly shows a difference in design. The original Japanese one is much more appealing, at least in my opinion, with his spines being naturally integrated instead of a weird mohawk. Crazy how different artists would interpret sprite art in old games. In America we only saw the Mohawk Sonic, but in Europe they seem to get a weird mix of different artworks. Hey, at least they got the more appealing original sometimes. Over at the scores, the presentation gets only a 71 because it doesn't have graphics options, and only has one decent attract screen. What console games had graphic options? And why are we worried about nice attract screens? The readers aren't arcade owners buying cabinets. Is their presentation section even needed? Graphics are of course stunning. Sound they say grates after a while. I can agree, the loops are very short. Playability a 94 and lastability gets an 85. Like its Mega Drive edition, it's not a long game. Overall they give it a 90%, which is very fair for the console. Hey, Asterix and Obelix, nice. Heading downward into Spain, we find Happy Consolas, March 1992 issue, reviewed the Game Gear edition. Oh hey, they used the right box art. They start off saying it's the best looking Game Gear game, and that the graphics are improved even over those on the Master System. I mean, there's a bit more color like I mentioned in Jungle Zone. But man, Sonic's noseless sprite is weird to me. I guess I can see where they were coming from, which, by the way, a leaked prototype ROM does show us the Master System sprite being used on the Game Gear. This only has the first act of Green Hill and really nothing else unique to show. It lacks the hazard signs, and a larger sprite did make the screen crunch that much worse, so I get why they made a new one that's smaller. Just why does Sonic have to go around looking like Krillin? Back to the article. It finishes with also noting that even the Sega shout was sampled for the startup, which is a great touch. Over in Japan, things were more critical. On the 3rd of January 1992, Famitsu's team reviewed the Game Gear version, and all 4 writers took issue with the screen, giving 3 6s and a 5. The screen quality is something I'm surprised to not see mentioned in other magazines. The refresh rate on older LCDs were not good. The first one states just because a game was interesting on a 14-inch monitor does not mean it will be interesting on a portable machine, particularly for Sonic where speed equals life. Before even enjoying the gameplay, my eyes got tired. The second reviewer echoes him with, "To be frank, the Mega Drive version was easier to play. I can't keep up with the speed on an LCD. Wow, my eyes hurt." Another complained of his thumbs getting tired, and the final one who only gave it a 5 said, "It feels like when Mario was ported to the Game Boy and became Super Mario Land. There are fewer enemies, the map configuration is a bit malicious, and there are many deaths from falling, as if to balance it out." Man, Famitsu was harsh back in the day. January 1992's Beat Mega Drive had some more to say about the Game Gear version, and was more generous with 3 7s and an 8. Multiple reviewers were impressed with the Sega startup sound being ported over, and the sense of speed being retained. However, the first reviewer is the only one to note that the Game Gear screen ends up blurring the background when at speed. The third review mentions that there is too many pitfalls that make it easy to die and becomes frustrating, but believes it's a well-made game and wishes they made the levels for more casual players. Interesting considering many other reviews complained of the game being too easy. The bottom one says it's quite close to the Mega Drive version, but there is parts where speed is disadvantageous. True, but half the Mega Drive version is the same way. It would be remiss of me to not include some magazines from the land where the Master System was most popular. So next is January 1992's issue of Asso Games over in Brazil. This unfortunately is another case of the review being a description of the game, but it does finish saying, without a doubt, this is the best release of the Master System in recent times, and gives it a 4 out of 4 in graphics, sound, and challenge. So a perfect score. April 1992's issue of Super Game, in fact, had a complete guide for the entire game. Truly remarkable, and the only one I could find showing the Master System's popularity in the country. And for my ranking, this is a tough one. I'm really debating between B or C tier. It's for sure a solid 8-bit conversion of Sonic's gameplay. It loses some of the speed naturally, yet everything else is kept. That is remarkable. But the last stretch of the game is bumpy, at least on the first playthrough. Yet the other dimension that has to be considered for this list is how the game compares to the others in the series, particularly the other 8-bit ones, and some of them are going to be more rough. A couple will be better. So you know what? I'm going to give it a B. I'd struggle far more to justify the C as the series goes on. What can I say? It's an enjoyable experience, and job well done by the Ancient team. Too bad they wouldn't go on to make more games in the series. And what happened to Ancient in the years since this? After Sonic, they made games like Streets of Rage 2 and 3, Beyond Oasis, its prequel-sequel, Legend of Oasis, Amazing Island for the GameCube, which I happen to rent, and they are still around producing games today as an indie studio with around 15 staff. Recently, they put out a game for the Switch called Gutta Protectors, Card of Darkness, which is a unique blend of hack and slash and tower defense, where you protect a princess who's ramming her castle into an enemy castle. It's as awesome as it sounds. And in 2024, they are working on a shoot-'em-up called Eartheon that will be dropping this year for all modern consoles and the Sega Genesis. That's right, they're going to put it on the Genesis as well. Super cool. Yuzo himself has gone on to have an amazing career composing for many famous games, like Shenmue, Puzzle & Dragons, Smash Brothers, and a big favorite of mine, the Etrian Odyssey series. And finally, where can you play Sonic 1 8-bit today? Well, as touched on earlier, the Game Gear version has been consistently ported throughout the years. In Sonic Adventure DX for the GameCube, they are included as some unlockables, and it's important to note they are not included in the modern ports of Adventure DX. Only the one for the GameCube. It appeared again in Mega Collection Plus for Xbox and PS2, and then most recently in Sonic Origins Plus for all modern systems and PC. As for the Master System version, well, It was on the Wii Virtual Console, but that was shut down in 2019, losing access to this and many other classic games. Its only other release was for a Brazilian plug-and-play console called the Master System 3, which came with a bunch of other games on it. Oddly, only this and Sonic Drift 2, a Game Gear game, were the only titles in the Sonic series to be included on it. But there is one more option out there thanks to the fan community called the Sonic SMS Remake for Windows and Android, which is far more of a remix than a remake, since it has redesigned levels. It's made by Creative Araya and has more playable characters, new music, more stages and general features, like widescreen and becoming supersonic. I'll probably cover this in its own video someday. It's certainly deserving of the treatment. Sonic 1 8-bit does live on to this day thanks to its many handheld ports at least, and serves as quite the curiosity. Distilling Sonic's gameplay down into half to bits was no small task. And although some of what we now consider iconic features like loops were lost, much of the charm was kept, and arguably even came with some small improvements depending on your taste. After all, nothing was truly established about the series, and for some this was for sure the first time they experienced Sonic. Historically, the series has never been thought of for its 8-bit entries, but in recent years that does seem to be getting re-evaluated online. At the time it was thought of as a downport for the market that couldn't thus far get a Genesis. Yet the game can stand tall all on its own, and for sure is worth revisiting today. Dinner's ready. Hey there, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing, dropping a like, leaving a comment, and ringing that bell. It helps a lot. I used the new Procreate Dreams for the animation this time. I vastly prefer the raster look to vector. More natural. But man, it just ain't ready for prime time. Constant crashes and it doesn't even have a lasso tool, making limited animation painfully slow. I'll likely have to go back to Blender till it's ready. Probably cost me an extra week in time. If anyone is wondering about the next hidden gems, I have found and played the first game for it. We'll see how quickly I can find actual gems. Not entirely sure what my next video will be on. I got a big list to go through. Maybe Alundra, maybe iRobot, maybe Pinball, maybe even something else. We'll see. Take care everyone, and I'll see you all next time.